I, 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 I got a letter from the government the other day.
Yes, welcome to another edition of Your World News, where once again we're breaking down the misinformation or disinformation put out there by the U.S. corporate media, the propaganda that they put out there to mentally program masses of Americans regarding a range of things. In this case, it's an interesting video that has sparked a lot of attention this past week, stemming from Dennis Rodman's trip to North Korea. Tim, do you want to talk about some of the hypocrisies that are put out there by, in this case, George Stephanopoulos, who was interviewing Dennis Rodman?
I mean, I think it's almost comical to see some of the heated questions that he asked Dennis Rodman, because he alludes to the fact that, we're talking about a dictator here, we're talking about major human rights abuses, a prison system that's so unjust.
Mm-hmm.
But the interesting thing is, when you turn those arguments around and focus on the U.S. itself, you see that the U.S. has far more people in prison, around 2.5 million to be exact, whereas the journalist only points out 200,000 in North Korea. He talks about, how Dennis Rodman supposedly is supporting a dictator, when in fact the U.S. has a long history of installing dictators in several countries. I mean, you can look at, for example, Iran, where Mossadegh was taken out and replaced by the Shah.
That's right.
You can look at how Patrice Lumumba was assassinated, cut up into 8 pieces and thrown into acid.
Mm-hmm.
You can look at so many different episodes in history where the U.S. has specifically supported brutal dictators and taken out benevolent socialist leaders.
Right, Augusto Pinochet, taking out Salvador Allende in 1973 in Chile, and installing, as you said, a very brutal dictator in Augusto Pinochet. The list goes on and
Batista
on and on.
in Cuba.
Batista, taking out Jacobo Arbenz in Guatemala. I mean, the list literally goes on and on and on. And it's just unfortunate that so many Americans are so obsequious, so mentally obsequious to whatever the government and its corporate media put out there about them. And so they hear it and they just believe everything. And in this case, this video, I mean, we were watching this case and we were going over this video this weekend, and we were there's just so many instances of just disinformation that's put out there that if most Americans had honed or their critical thinking skills, or media literate, or literate about geopolitics and just basic history,
Mm-hmm.
they would catch these hypocrisies. So I'm sorry for interrupting, but I just want to interject that.
Oh, no problem. And I think this is just part of the greater scheme of the corporate media to drill that into Americans' minds. The U.S. is the benevolent country that wants to get rid of dictators, that's a champion of human rights, when in fact it's the exact opposite of that. The U.S., from its foundation and its history,
Right,
is one of the worst human rights records in history. So anyone that tries to impose those type of judgments on other countries that lives here in the U.S. cannot do so without first looking at this government and this country's history and how dark, bloody, and brutal it really was and is to this day.
That's right. So you want to tell them what we did with this video that we've prepared that we're about to show you in a few moments?
Yeah, so basically, because the journalist said so many things that were hypocritical, we basically chopped up the interview into different parts and added in some information that the corporate media will never provide you with, to just give you more of a balanced perspective and to expose those hypocrisies that you're about to see.
Yeah. So without further ado, we just want you to watch this. Within this video are a lot of factoids that are often, left off the corporate mainstream airwaves. So, for instance, Malcolm X grassroots movement puts out this past year in 2012 an extensive, detailed report detailing that every 36 hours, at the least, every 36 hours in the U.S., a black person is extrajudiciously killed, murdered by the police, murdered by so-called law enforcement, and so forth. And that's put out there. And the mainstream corporate media didn't pick it up anywhere whatsoever. The lives, the lives of black people being taken, outside the realm of due process. No way. We're not going to cover that. That's not newsworthy. That's not newsworthy whatsoever. The CIA backed, rebels that went in, that were strategically supported by as I said, the CIA in countries like Libya, going in there and targeting, black Libyans and as well as black Africans from other countries that were living in Libya, brutally raping, any black woman that they found, chopping off their breasts, all that kind of stuff. That's left off of the range of the U.S. corporate media, as well as, Human Rights Watch, which is a very selective organization. They pick and choose what they want to cover. So they don't want to cover, CIA-backed, terrorist groups in Libya as well as we see in Syria right now. And so, we put this together, and we hope that that you appreciate it, and we ask that you please, disseminate this video far and wide to all your contacts, people that might be interested in this alternative but accurate, factual information, as well as a different perspective put on, this kind of news. So, want to go to the video now?
All right, let's watch it.
All right.
And we are back now with this week's weirdest encounter. Top of the news in North Korea. The first American to meet Kim Jong-un, not John Kerry or even Jimmy Carter. Nope, it was Dennis Rodman, a.k.a. the Worm. They watch basketball. Kim is a big fan, but that was just the beginning. Some ice skating, too, an aquarium visit. Then a long dinner and lots of drinks with one of the world's most mysterious and dangerous men.
I love him. I love the guys. Awesome. It was amazing how they were so honest.
That about a dictator who presides over prison camps, allows millions to starve, and has threatened to destroy the United States. Amazingly, Rodman now has more first-hand impressions of Kim than any other American.
There is nobody at the CIA who could tell you more personally about Kim Jong-un than Dennis Rodman, and that in itself is scary.
The CIA's main concern in Africa was to prevent the Soviets from gaining any sort of stronghold in the continent, and efforts were focused on one huge country at the heart of the region, the Congo.
Within days of formal independence, Congo was in complete turmoil. Patrice Lumumba, who was the prime minister at that stage, was asking the Soviets to help. There were hundreds of Soviet advisors flying into the airport and who were then broadcasting propaganda to the Congolese army.
Lumumba's behavior was completely unacceptable to the CIA, so the agents in the Congo began to look for a replacement, and they found one in a young man called Mobutu.
CIA first spotted Mobutu as a potential collaborator in 1960. They regarded him as very intelligent, very immature, but very promising.
A new chapter begins in the dark and tragic history of the Congo with the return to Leopoldville of deposed Premier Lumumba, following his capture by crack commandos of strongman Colonel Mobutu.
On January 17th, 1961, Lumumba was dragged into the jungle, beaten and then murdered by troops loyal to Mobutu. The CIA had got its way. Their man Mobutu was now in charge of the Congo, and the Soviets were no longer welcome there.
Lumumba was removed to an army prison.
He was a very helpful, earnest, clever, non-ideological young man from very humble, rather complicated background, who Western people found very useful.
He was very much indeed a strong man, a strong personality, and Congo became his backyard. He had everything for himself. He controlled everything himself. And thus he became, even at the time, even the most richest guy on earth.
Over his lifetime, he was reckoned to have taken 4 billion, equivalent to half of the Congo's GDP. And what did he spend it on? Lots of quote-unquote palaces, which included a whole compound in Gabadalite. It looked like Disney, but it cost a great deal of money. Mobutu had a small airport, but not so small that Concorde couldn't regularly land and take off there, because Concorde was hired for shopping trips to Paris. There is no question that the CIA knew the order of theft. Of course they knew.
Mobutu's greed was matched only by his cruelty, and it was the people of the Congo who paid the high price during his 32 years in power.
He became like an animal. He became like a lion.
Je m'appelle Mobutu.
People were very scared about Mobutu. If you touch Mobutu's politics or Mobutu's interests, you are finished, man. You are gone.
I think if you look back, what becomes harder and harder to defend is the fact that the CIA kept supporting Mobutu until the 90s. I find that astonishing. I've now spent 10 years in Africa, and every African I've ever met believes that if something happens in his country that is negative and damaging, the CIA was behind it. But they have good reason to think that, because the CIA did intervene time and time again. It did make sure that dictators ended up running the show. It did make sure that human rights atrocities were hushed up. So the paranoia that is still there, which makes every African you meet think that the CIA is probably behind that, is completely justified.
And Dennis Rodman joins us right now. I guess you don't find it scary.
No, it's not scary. It's amazing, man. Wow, man. You know what? It was such a great experience. Me and my, I call him my son, Elkin King. We went there, man, and it wasn't supposed to be like that. It was supposed to be like, just meet the guy and just have a good time.
And it turned into such an event. And I have to ask you first, when you said you love Kim and think he's awesome, were you aware of his threats to destroy the United States and his regime's horrendous record on human rights?
But one thing about that, you know what? I didn't look at all that right there. I understand what he's doing. I don't condone that. I hate the fact that he's doing that, but the fact of it is that, you know what, as a human being, though, he let his guards down. He did one thing to me, been a friend. I didn't talk about that. I understand that. I understand that.
Do you think you have a responsibility to ask him about it so that you don't be perceived as sort of propping up his regime, his cult of personality?
Well, I think when you grow up in an environment, especially when your grandpa and your father, you know, one thing, the kid's only 28 years old.
You called them great leaders. Do you really believe that?
No, what I saw in that country, and I saw how people respect him and his family. That's what I mean about that.
Aren't
great
they
leaders
forced
there.
to?
Huh?
Aren't they forced to?
Well, I say no, because I think he's going to change something, because he says a different view. Because I sat with him for 2 days, and the one thing he asked me to give Obama something to say and do one thing. He wants Obama to do one thing: call him.
He wants a call from President Obama?
That's right. He told me that. He said, if you can, Dennis, I don't want to do war. I don't want to do war. He said that to me.
Did you say, why don't you pick up the phone and call President Obama?
No, you know, it's a different story. It's a different story, because guess what? The kid's only 28 years old. 28. He's not his dad, not his grandpa. He's 28 years old.
So you think he's different. What did he tell you about America, and what did you learn about him?
Guess what? The one thing I said to him, I said, we talked about, if you see the clips or whatever, he loves basketball. And I said the same thing. I said, Obama loves basketball. Let's start there. Let's start there. If you see the quotes in the papers, he says that. He says that about sports. Both of you guys love basketball so much.
So that's one tiny bit of common ground. Did you get any sense from him that he was looking to change the relationship with the United States?
Well, one thing I noticed about him, he's very humble. He's very humble, man. As a kid, he's very humble. He's very strong as a man. He's very strong, but guess what? He don't want war. That's one thing he don't want.
Said in the past that he would destroy the United States.
Well, I just think that's coming from his father. I think as a young man, he don't want anything.
What else does he know about the United States and President Obama from what you could tell?
Well, I can tell about him, he does one thing. He loves power. He loves control because of his, dad and stuff like that. But he's a great guy. He's just a great guy. If you sit down and talk to him, perception is perceiving how things work.
A great guy who puts 200,000 people in prison camps?
Well, guess what? It's amazing how we do the same thing here.
We have prison camps here in the United States?
We don't have prison camps. Guess what? It's all politics, right? It's all politics, right? And the one thing, he don't want to do that. He don't want to do that. But you know what, dude? It's more like it. I'm not like a diplomat. I don't want to do that.
But it sounds like you're apologizing for him.
No, I'm not apologizing for him. I think the fact that, he's a good guy to me. Guess what? He's my friend. Guess what? I don't condone what he does, but as far as a person to person, he's my friend. But as far as what he does,
but
he deal with it.
Someone who hypothetically is a murderer, who's your friend, is still a murderer.
Well, you know what, dude? Seriously, I think guess what? Guess what? What I did was history. Was history, and guess what? It's just like we do over here in America, right? It's amazing that we have presidents over here do the same thing, right? It's amazing that Bill Clinton could do one thing, have sex with his secretary and do one thing, really get away with it and still be powerful. And
How can you compare that to prison camps?
Prison camp do one thing. We don't need to do one thing. Object that. We don't need to object that. Guess what? We're doing one thing. If like a friend to friend, right? It's a friend to friend. He's a friend to me. That's about it.
So you're going to go back?
Yes, I am. I'm going to go back, do one thing, and find out more what's really going on. Find out more.
Okay, next time you go back, you should bring this report from the Human Rights Watch with you and maybe ask me questions about that. As well, you might learn a lot more, and it might press him as well. But thank you for coming on this morning and sharing your impressions.
Either way, guess what, though?
Here's the report.
Guess what? Thank you for the report.
Okay.
Guess what? Don't hate me. Don't hate me. Guess what? Don't hate me. Guess what? Don't hate me.
I got a letter from the government the other day. I opened and read it and burned that. Man, the way that I live don't concern that. Man.